Let's talk politics this Friday. Joining us to talk more about the latest political headlines is CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, thank you so much for your time. We had more notable confirmations this week, including the new FBI director, Kash Patel. When we talk about reaction from South Carolina leaders, I'm curious if you have heard any kind of reaction or perspective from Senators Tim Scott or Lindsey Graham.
Senator Scott and Senator Graham have been vocal champions of all these nominees from President Trump. And at first there was some concern that the initial wave of nominees were too controversial to get through. And at some point, Senator Graham equivocated on the nomination and confirmation of Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary. But Senator Graham ended up voting for Mr. Hegseth and has voted on behalf of all of President Trump's nominees. The pushback isn't coming on nominees, but we're watching to see, do some of the South Carolina Republicans, do some of the House Republicans in more endangered seats push back on the cuts to government agencies, government staffing, and government funding. Some of this is not going to be popular in some parts of America. When you cut employees from the VA, and there are wait time issues at hospitals and clinics, when you cut employees from the National Park Service, if there's going to be a problem getting access to national parks this spring and this summer, that's where we want to see if House Republicans get any pushback from their voters, including their Republican voters, and then try to push back on the president for doing it.
Well, hours ago, we also know, I should say yesterday, we found out that the IRS is cutting more jobs. You just talked about job cuts. Could that impact folks right here in South Carolina as we talk about tax season? A lot of folks are wondering about this.
Yeah, it is tax season, and staffing levels are always important during tax season. If you go back 3 years, there were enormous backlogs and wait times at the IRS. It frustrated a lot of people who gave Washington an earful over it. That's why over the last 2 years, the IRS staffed up. There was law passed to give them more employees to make it easier for taxpayers to file. But the IRS is rarely popular, no matter what time of year it is. So politicians do seem fit to try to cut it back when they can. They win some points at home. We'll see what those cutbacks mean this tax season, or more likely next tax season. The whole purpose of staffing up the IRS was to make it easier for people to file and get their returns. We'll see if that's complicated now.
Okay, next tax season. Keep that in mind. Okay, so earlier today, President Trump did a phone interview talking about negotiations to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. And when talking about Ukraine's president, Trump said he does not need to be at the meetings and, quote, he has no cards. So what's next?
There is a wedge issue locally. Senator Graham has been among the, if not the, most vocal Republican supporter of President Zelensky and U.S. intervention in Ukraine. The senator has told us on many occasions if we don't support Ukraine, the aggression and the wars are going to expand and going to cost the U.S. more resources. We're going to watch over the coming days and weeks how Republicans navigate Donald Trump's equivocation on support of Ukraine and his criticisms of President Zelensky. President Trump is at this point threading a needle with his fellow Republicans. We'll see if he can continue to do so while pushing back at a U.S. ally.
Okay, Scott, we do have one more question. Is there any truth to reports circulating that President Trump is now looking at privatizing the United States Postal Service?
Yeah, a pretty blockbuster report in the Washington Post Thursday night into Friday morning said that there was a consideration of taking the post office out of its independent standing and putting it under a White House agency, the U.S. Commerce Department. There are imperfections in the Postal Service that many presidents would like to fix. It's unclear if this would do the trick. We also know that the Postal Service is among the most popular of government agencies, and its independence is prized. There will be lawsuits. There will be perhaps many lawsuits if the president tries to make a move on the U.S. Postal Service.
All right, Scott, as always, we appreciate your time and your perspective.